All right, we are continuing the book of First Maccabees, part 2. First Maccabees, chapter 3, verse 38. Lysias chose Ptolemy, the son of Dorymenes, and Nicanor and Gorgias, mighty men among the friends of the king, and sent with them 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. All right, underline those numbers, make note of them. To go into the land of Judah and destroy it, as the king had commanded. So they departed with their entire force. When they arrived, they encamped near Emmaus in the plain. When the traders of the region heard what was said of them, they took silver and gold in immense amounts and shackles, and went to the camp to get the sons of Israel for slaves. And forces from Syria and the land of the Philistines joined with them. Now Judas and his brothers saw that misfortunes had increased, and that the forces were encamped in their territory. They also learned what the king had commanded to do to the people to cause their final destruction. But they said to one another, "Let us repair the destruction of our people and fight for our people in the sanctuary." And the congregation assembled to be ready for battle, and to underline, pray and ask for mercy and compassion. Okay, so they hear that the forces of the enemy are drawing around about them. They don't start battle planning. They don't start sharpening their weapons. Okay, the entire assembly takes time to pray for mercy. Verse 45, Jerusalem was uninhabited like a wilderness. Not one of her children went in or out. The sanctuary was trampled down, and the sons of aliens held the citadel. It was a lodging place for the Gentiles. Joy was taken from Jacob. The flute and the harp ceased to play. So they assembled and went to Mizpah, opposite Jerusalem, because Israel formerly had a place of prayer in Mizpah. They fasted that day, put on sackcloth and sprinkled ashes on their heads, and tore their clothes. All right. Fasting prior to a military battle, all right? Military battles that usually take all day, exert all your energy, all right? This is a huge act of faith, right? It's showing that like they're totally relying on God for the victory, all right? Not on their own prowess. Verse 48. And they opened the book of the law to inquire into whose matters about which the Gentiles were consulting the images of their idols. They also brought the garments of the priesthood and the first fruits and the tithes, and they stirred up the Nazarites who had completed their days. And they cried aloud to heaven, cried aloud to God, saying, "What shall we do with these? Where shall we take them? Your sanctuary is trampled down and profaned, and your priests mourn in humiliation. And behold, the Gentiles are assembled against us to destroy us. You know what they plot against us. How will we be able to withstand them if you do not help us?" Down to verse 56. And he said to those who were building houses, or who were betrothed, or who were planting vineyards, or faint-hearted, that each should return to his home according to the law. All right, so Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 5 through 9 stipulates that when Israel's to go to war as a nation, anyone who has just built a home, who is betrothed, right, newly married, or who's just planted a vineyard, or if they're faint of heart and a coward, they do not need to go into battle. And according to the Torah, they're to be sent home. And so here you get the Maccabees following the Torah, all right, right down to the letter of the law. All right, doing just that, taking all those people that the Torah says should not go into battle. All right, they're not going to go into battle. All right, we don't need these many people. All right, we can rely on God. Verse 57, then the army marched out and encamped to the south of Emmaus. And Judah said, "Gird yourselves and be valiant. Be ready early in the morning to fight with these Gentiles who have assembled against us to destroy us in our sanctuary. It is better for us to die in battle than to see the misfortunes of our nation and of the sanctuary. But as his will in heaven may be, so he will do. Now Gorgias took 5,000 infantry and 1,000 picked cavalry, and this division moved out by night to fall upon the camp of the Jews and attack them suddenly. Men from the citadel were his guides. But Judas heard of it, and he and his mighty men moved out to attack the king's force in Emmaus, while the division was still absent from the camp. When Gorgias entered the camp of Judas by night, he found no one there. So he looked for them in the hills, because he said, "These men are fleeing from us." At daybreak, Judas appeared in the plain with, highlight, 3,000 men, and they did not have armor and swords as they desired. Okay, so remember the force that is initially sent to them is 40,000 infantry, 7,000 cavalry. Compare that to Judas Maccabees' 3,000 men. Okay, and these 3,000 men don't even have enough armor or swords to equip them all. Verse 7, and they saw the camp of the Gentiles, strong and fortified with cavalry round about it. And these men were trained in war, right? These are professional soldiers. The Maccabean revolters, they are, they're, your typical peasants that have started rebelling, okay? They're not professional troops. Verse 8, but Judas said to the men who were with him, do not fear their numbers or be afraid when they charge. Remember how our fathers were saved at the Red Sea, when Pharaoh with his forces pursued them. Okay, similar to his father, Judas, he encourages them to place their trust in God, but he doesn't just ask them to do that blindly. Okay, he reminds them of salvation history. Remember how God looked after the Israelites, okay? When Pharaoh and his chariots came out to kill them at the Red Sea. And what did God do? God parted the Red Sea for the Israelites to escape. And then God, right, was the one who destroyed Pharaoh's army by causing the Red Sea to flood back on Pharaoh and his chariots. Verse 10, and now let us cry to heaven to see whether he will favor us and remember his covenant with our fathers and crush this army before us today. Then all the Gentiles will know that there is no one who redeems and saves. Then all the Gentiles will know that there is one who redeems and saves Israel. When the foreigners looked up and saw them coming against them, they went forth from their camp to battle. Then the men with Judas blew their trumpets and engaged in battle. The Gentiles, were crushed and fled into the plain, and all those in the rear fell by the sword. They pursued them to Gazara, into the plains of Idumea, into Azotus and Jamnia, and 3,000 of them fell. All right. So all these cities, they basically flew north, south, east, and west. Okay. The Greek army scattered in 4 directions. Verse 16. Then Judas and his forces turned back from pursuing them. And he said to the people, do not be greedy for plunder, for there is a battle before us. Gorgias and his force are near us in the hills. But stand now against our enemies and fight them, and afterward seize the plunder boldly. Just as Judas was finishing this speech, a detachment appeared, coming out of the hills. And they saw that their army had been put to flight, and that the Jews were burning the camp, for the smoke that was seen showed what happened. When they perceived this, they were greatly frightened. And when they also saw the army of Judas drawn up in the plain for battle, they all fled into the land of the Philistines. Then Judas returned to plunder the camp, and they seized much gold and silver, and cloth dyed blue and sea purple, and great riches. On the return, they sang hymns and praises to heaven, for he is good. Okay, sang praises to God, for he is good. For his mercy endures forever. It's Psalm 118. Okay, so they're probably singing Psalm 118 or Psalm 135. Okay. Thus Israel had a great deliverance that day. Those of the foreigners who escaped went and reported to Lysias all that had happened. When he heard it, he was perplexed and discouraged, for things had not happened to Israel as he had intended, nor had they turned out as the king had commanded him. But the next year he mustered 60,000 picked infantrymen and 5,000 cavalry. All right, underline that. So he's upping the ante, more soldiers this time to subdue them. Verse 29. They came to Idumea and encamped at Bethzur, and Judas met them with 10,000 men. All right, still greatly outnumbered. When he saw that the army was strong, Judah prayed. All right, showing his humility and his faith, saying, Blessed are you, O Savior of Israel, who did crush the attack of the mighty warrior by the hand of your servant David, and did give the camp of the Philistines into the hands of Jonathan, the son of Saul, and of the man who carried his armor. So do you hem in this army by the hand of your people Israel, and let them be ashamed of their troops and their cavalry. Fill them with cowardice, melt the boldness of their strength, let them tremble in their destruction. Strike them down with the sword of those who love you, and let all who know your name praise you with hymns. Then both sides attacked, and there fell the army of Lysias, 5,000 men. They fell in action. And when Lysias saw the rout of his troops and observed the boldness which inspired those of Judas, and how ready they were either to live or to die nobly, he departed to Antioch and enlisted mercenaries to invade Judea, again with an even larger army. Verse 38. So the cleansing and dedication of the temple. All right, this is the feast of Hanukkah that's celebrated in the month of December. So verse 36, then said Judas and his brothers, Behold, our enemies are crushed. Let us go up to cleanse the sanctuary and dedicate it. Right now that they have free time and now that they have rest, what are they going to do? They're not going to rebuild their homes. The first thing they're going to go take care of is restoring the temple. So all the army assembled and they went up to Mount Zion. And they saw the sanctuary desolate, the altar profaned, and the gates burned. In the courts they saw bushes sprung up as in a thicket, or as one of the mountains. They saw also the chambers of the priests in ruins. Then they tore their clothes and mourned with great lamentation, and sprinkled themselves with ashes. They fell face down on the ground, and sounded the signal of the trumpets, and cried out to heaven. Then Judas detailed men to fight against those into the citadel, until he had cleansed the sanctuary. All right, so Judas, he's a priest, and in Jerusalem, there were those who remained loyal to the Greeks. Remember, they had set up that gymnasium. There are many Jews who were fully gung-ho about joining this Greek culture. And so while Judah and his men go about the work cleansing the temple, most likely these guys would have been Levites because they're pretty strict about following the Torah. So I imagine Judas would have also, picked descendants of Levi to be the ones to manage the sacred vessels and such. And then he sent other men to go and clear out the citadel. Okay, so his priority is restoring, God's house first, and then, having faith that the rest of his army, they don't need him, right? He's not the one that's providing the victory in these military feats, okay? It's God. So he sends the rest of his men to go out and cleanse Jerusalem from the Gentiles who've been living there, and then also the Jews who had, committed apostasy and were eager to remain under Greek dominion. Jump to chapter 4, verse 56. So they celebrated the dedication of the altar for 8 days and offered burnt offerings with gladness. They offered a sacrifice of deliverance and praise. They decorated the front of the temple with golden crowns and small shields. They restored the gates and the chambers for the priests and furnished them with doors. There was very great gladness among the people, and the reproach of the Gentiles was removed. Then Judas and his brothers And all the assembly of Israel determined that every year at that season, the days of the dedication of the altar should be observed with gladness and joy for 8 days, beginning with the 25th day of the month of Chislev. All right, and that is the first celebration of Hanukkah that's been continued. All right, fun fact, John chapter 10, verse 22, Jesus celebrates Hanukkah. You can go check John chapter 10, verse 22. Go to chapter 5, verse 21. All right. Simon, all right, this is the brother of Judas, Maccabees. Simon went to Galilee, all right, up north, and fought many battles against the Gentiles, and the Gentiles were crushed before him as well. Now we're going to be jumping a little bit ahead. That's the basic story of the Maccabean revolt. Okay, what are they that led them to succeed? Okay, they placed their faith in God. Where their faith come from? It came from knowledge of salvation history. And if you jump ahead to chapter 8, we now reach the sad part of the book. Okay, because we know that, well, if you know anything about the New Testament, right? Israel is under Roman dominion. All right, it came under Roman dominion when the Romans conquered the Greeks. So, ultimately, we know the ending isn't going to be a completely successful rebellion. So, in chapter 8, verse 17, Judas Maccabeus makes an alliance with Rome to help him fight the Greeks, right? And this is bad, okay? Because when you make an alliance with Rome, what you're doing is you're making a covenant with them. All right. And so by making a covenant with the Romans, you're putting faith in the Roman deities, no longer in God. Okay. And so as soon as Judas makes this treaty alliance, okay, he breaks the Torah, and then his military victories cease as well. So 1 Maccabees chapter 8, verse 17. So Judas chose Eupolemus, the son of John, son of Achus, and Jason, the son of Eleazar, and sent them to Rome to establish friendship and alliance, and to free themselves from the yoke, for they saw that the kingdom of the Greeks was completely enslaving Israel. They went to Rome, a very long journey, and they entered the Senate chamber and spoke as follows. Judas, who is also called Maccabeus, and his brothers and the people of the Jews have sent us to you to establish alliance and peace with you, that we may be enrolled as your allies and friends. The proposal pleased them, and this is a copy of the letter which they wrote in reply on bronze tablets and sent to Jerusalem to remain with them there as a memorial of peace and alliance. Jump ahead to chapter 9, verse 4. The Greeks march off and went to Berea with 20,000 foot soldiers and 2,000 cavalry. All right. So the Greeks are sending another invasion force, this time only 20,000 troops. Okay. This is the smallest army that's gone to fight Judas Maccabeus. Chapter 9, verse 7. When Judas saw that his army had slipped away and the battle was imminent, he was crushed in spirit, for he had no time to assemble them. Verse 8, he became faint. But he said to those who are left, remember our fathers. No, he doesn't say that, okay? He doesn't give a speech about salvation history. He doesn't, call upon God for help. He says, let us rise and go up against our enemies. We may be able to fight them. All right, we might be able to pull this off. But they tried to dissuade him, saying, we are not able. Let us rather save our own lives now, and let us come back with our brethren and fight them. We are too few. They're too few, please. All right, with 3,000 guys, they crushed an army of 40,000 before. Verse 10, but Judas said, far be it from us to do such a thing as to flee from them. If our time has come, let us die bravely for our brethren and leave no cause to question our honor. Chapter 9, verse 17, the battle became desperate, and many on both sides were wounded and fell. Judas also fell, and the rest fled. Okay. Tragic, but you also can't say you didn't really see it coming. Okay, if you're paying attention to the themes of this book, okay, that it's all about keeping the covenant, and then Judas doesn't do that. So after Judas dies, verse 23, Jonathan, his brother, takes command of the army, and Jonathan makes the same mistake as Judas. In chapter 12, Jonathan makes an alliance with both Rome and Sparta, all right, as a way of holding off, this kingdom of the Greeks that is threatening them. And not surprisingly, Jonathan, he had victories prior to this. After making this alliance with Rome and Sparta, Jonathan fails and he is killed in battle. So chapter 13, Simon takes command of the army. And again, in chapter 14, verse 16, Simon does the same thing, all right? He reestablishes the treaty with Rome and Sparta. So I don't have to tell you, it's not going to go well for Simon in the end. All right, so Simon's murdered. However, he leaves some descendants behind. And the descendants of Simon are what we refer to as the Hasmonean dynasty. The Hasmonean dynasty, right? They're these rulers who kind of stay behind and they maintain as local rulers Israel, even though Israel's always going to be under the Greeks, and then eventually the Romans are going to come in and take control of the entire province. The Hasmonean dynasty plays a function in the New Testament. All right, remember they are a priest family. They're descendants of Aaron. They're not descendants of David. Okay, so King Herod the Great, all right, the guy who orders the execution of the Holy Innocents. Okay, that the one that meets up with the wise men during the time Christ is born. Herod the Great is an Edomite. Okay, so Herod is a descendant of Esau. He is not an Israelite, an Edomite from the south. And in order to add credibility to his claim to the throne that the Romans have basically handed to Herod, is he marries a Hasmonean princess. All right, he marries a descendant of Simon. All right, and what that does is, that puts him into good graces with the local people. Herod also rebuilds the temple in Jerusalem, which is destroyed by these Maccabean wars. So, what's Herod trying to do? Like, he knows that the son of David's they had this connection with the temple. So Herod tries to build the temple to make himself a legitimate Christ, a legitimate king. And then he also marries into the most prestigious family, right, at the time, trying to further his, legitimacy with the people and such. All right, and thus concludes First Maccabees. We'll go over Second Maccabees briefly in the next video, and then after that, we'll start the New Testament.